possible motive?
The authorities were fully staffed for New Year's Eve celebrations. There's a parade that's supposed to take place today, the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans later tonight. So in addition to a fully staffed New Orleans Police Department, they called an additional 300 officers from partner agencies to help provide protection and security. And until 3:15 a.m. local time, everything had been fine. The authorities did not say anything about a motive, but did make it clear this was an intentional act. They've undoubtedly by now identified who the suspect is and knew enough about his motive to immediately turn the investigation over to the FBI and call this an act of terrorism. Was he angry? Was he motivated by some kind of online propaganda, some kind of foreign terror group? That the police nor the FBI said, but they were confident enough at this point to call it terrorism and to ascribe this as some kind of an intentional act.
Absolutely. We know that investigation, as you pointed out, so complex, from, the explosive devices to, the driver plowing through the shooting as well. We are hearing from a witness who, heard and saw all of this unfold. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
Around 3:15, we heard a pop, 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 pop sound, followed by a sound that sounded like fireworks going off, like a big firework all at once. And it turned out that was the crash. So that pulled us out of bed, peeked through the curtains to see, what was going on. And at that point, we saw cops all over the place, stacking up, rifles trained on the car. So, peeking through the windows, we kind of backed away to make sure that the situation was okay. Saw the cops telling people in the other buildings, like, stay inside, stay inside.
Yeah, that witness there describing what he thought initially were fireworks, only to find out, as we just heard from Aaron, that there were gunshots. I do have another witness on the phone. Jimmy, are you with us? Can you briefly just describe what you heard, what you saw? Take us through everything that you witnessed on Bourbon Street there.
So Bourbon Street, like he said, probably about 3:10 a.m. We were heading towards Canal, which is the way the truck was coming towards us. We ducked off into a nightclub because we weren't sure what was going on at the other end, and it looked like just nothing we wanted to see. So we just ducked off into a club. By the time we got in, 5 girls had ran in frantically and hid under chairs. So us knowing where we were, we ran upstairs to the balcony to make it less available if something was following inside. And what we witnessed was body after body mangled, just as far as you could see. We counted 10, and at least 6 were instantly, clearly deceased. And they were trying to get everybody just to stay inside, but everyone had just completely disappeared. Like, after these people ran over, I think we were the only ones outside on the balcony, and we took video just for the sheer shock. Like, you don't see stuff like that on city streets. Yeah. And just no one was helping them. Like, that was kind of the first crazy thought we had, is why is no one helping them? They wouldn't let us out. And obviously, like I told you, some were very clearly deceased, but others were yelling out. And it's a lot to process.
Yeah. And I can hear that shock in your voice. Obviously, this had to be horrific to witness. I mean, I imagine that you were there celebrating, with your friends, your loved ones, ringing in the new year. And then to see and to watch all of this unfold, what was going through your mind, Jimmy?
Shock. Like, it looked like something out of a movie, the way these bodies were mangled. And we had just seen this one girl outside dancing when we were walking up. And not to be too graphic, but she was flattened. Like this was a full-size F-150 4x4, and this girl didn't even look human. And then another one had to be a mother. She was dead in front of us, right at my feet, just twisted, her skull. I mean, I could just keep going. Another gentleman, he was for sure deceased. He actually had tire tracks over his stomach and back when they were trying to finally check on him. And another woman had got her legs pinned when he run her over. Half her body was on the street, half her body was on the curb. So she obviously was very broken, but still breathing at that moment.
Yeah.
You know, these people are never going to wake up.
Yeah. The pure shock and the panic there that you just described, Jimmy, is so heartbreaking. I'm so glad that you are okay, and hopefully those that were with you and around you are okay as well. Jimmy, thank you for sharing that. Right now, I do want to bring in ABC's Josh Margolin. Josh, you're learning more about the FBI investigation. We heard earlier from the Superintendent Kirkpatrick with the New Orleans Police Department that initially they're thinking that this may have been an act of terrorism. What are you learning from the FBI? What are they looking into in terms of a motive? Where does this investigation play from here?
Well, the FBI will be slow to actually call it terrorism at this point. That's actually a federal crime. It's a federal charge. So just because something is a terrorist act, like the police chief obviously believes it was, and like it looks, the FBI is not going to be able to say that until they do more investigating. So as the police are clearing the scene and bomb squad is checking out this device to see if it is actually an explosive device, if it's functioning, the FBI already is doing what they can. They are taking the license plate of the truck. They are digging into the history of the truck. They're digging into the history of the owner of the truck. The person behind the wheel, presumably that person would be the owner of the truck. They're going to dig into that person's history, the online footprint, talk to people that the person had been talking to in recent days. The key is to find out what brings this driver, who allegedly was also a shooter, what brings this person to Bourbon Street with the intent to hurt people, as was described by police. And there are any number of possibilities. We've seen this sort of terrible alchemy out there of all of these different stewing grievances, people who are angry at the government, people who are angry at America, people who are angry in their workplace. We see school shootings. We've seen, other workplace shootings. And we've also seen a reemergence of jihadist and sort of ISIS type or Al-Qaeda type of Islamist, anti-America kinds of sentiment since the explosion of violence in the Middle East on October 7th, 2023, and the wars that Israel is now engaged with in Gaza and in Lebanon have really added to this really, really dangerous heightened threat environment in this country.
Yeah, and speaking of that heightened threat environment, let's dive into that because I've got Pierre Thomas, the Chief Justice correspondent, on the phone here. Police and municipalities across the country had been, heightened on alert for this, Pierre, over the past, few days. They had been preparing. I mean, we even saw here in Times Square with all of the barricades. But in this particular situation, this driver, the suspect, able to plow through those barricades. Where do things stand from here? And how does this even heighten the concern, not just today, but moving forward with some of these events that we may see throughout the rest of the year?
Well, they've already been in a heightened environment, as you know, but clearly having this happen on New Year's Eve into New Year's is now the highest priority for the federal government. The FBI is taking the lead on this case, and even though they haven't dubbed it an act of terrorism, the fact that there's the potential for that to be the case is what is leading them to be in charge. The FBI is setting up a command center with the local police. As you heard, the forensics now is key. Going over the truck, tooth and nail, whatever they can find out about the suspect, the owner of the vehicle, tracing the firearm. There's just levels and levels of investigation that will take place now. And what's clear here, too, is that there will be immense pressure on the federal government and local authorities to say what they can about this suspect and what this is and what this isn't as soon as possible, because you want to give the nation a sense of what you're dealing with. But this kind of mass casualty event involving a vehicle is something, as Josh just stated, has been on the minds of law enforcement. We've been in a heightened threat environment since October 7th of 2023 in the Israeli-Palestinian Hamas conflict. And law enforcement have been preparing for this. And one of the key questions is obviously going to be, why weren't the barricades strong enough to keep a vehicle from getting into that crowded area? That is going to undoubtedly be a question. But right now, the priority is simply, what can we find out about the suspect? What can we find out about whether this person has any connections? Was this person driven by any ideology, or was it simply a disturbed person acting out on their own?
Yeah, were the barricades strong enough? That certainly is going to be a question here, because we also heard, the police chief talk about him driving at a high rate of speed, that suspect there. So that will be under investigation. Do we still have Aaron on the phone? Because I want to go back to Aaron briefly, Aaron, in terms of like the timeline here. How does all of that complicate this investigation? Because you've got multiple layers of this investigation. You've got the driver plowing through, you've got the shooting, you've got the explosives. I mean, what are police hoping to gain from multiple investigations simultaneously? And does it make it even more challenging for them?
Well, they'll take it all step by step and develop their own timeline of what exactly happened from the moment they can trace the vehicle using surveillance cameras, see if they can find an origin point from the time it turns onto Bourbon Street, how it got through the barriers, how it was able to accelerate so fast, and then what the intention was. The forensics on the bullets will be key, because that will help determine the origin of the firearm and perhaps whether it was legally purchased, and they trace it. And then finally, once the suspect is formally identified, who he was, what his motivation was, where he got this idea. Was it something in his own head, or did he take inspiration from a foreign terror group online? But the other complicating factor, and you heard this reflected in the chief's comments, is there's a parade today in New Orleans. There's the Sugar Bowl tonight. Those events need to be secured.
Right, and I'm curious, Aaron, if those events need to be secure, but you've got a massive law enforcement presence right now on Bourbon Street and throwing all of those resources there. I mean, where do things stand there? I mean, one thing that we'll certainly be watching for is how the security preparations either escalate from here or heighten from here, and then how this impacts other celebrations even throughout the day and throughout the year here. Josh Margolin touched on something which I thought was really interesting, that this particular method in terms of cars, plowing through crowds here, absolutely horrific, resulting in highest casualty rates. Why is that? And what makes these, events where you have multiple people in one concentrated space, so attractive to some of these suspects who carry out these horrific acts?
Mass gatherings have always been feared to be prime targets for attack, and of course on holidays like New Year's Eve, you're almost guaranteed a crowd on Bourbon Street, even in the middle of the night at 3:15 a.m. local time. A vehicle ramming is a crude but insidiously effective type attack, because people barely have time to jump out of the way. You can see that in the high body count here, with 10 dead, 36 injured, and a suspect that the police said was hell-bent on causing carnage.
Right, and even to the point of, allegedly, having that gun and that shootout there. We heard from that witness who talked about not being able to tell the difference between, the fireworks and then also the gunshot. So that obviously adds a little bit of confusion to an already heightened and panicked environment for so many folks that were there and celebrating.
And the firearms is an interesting aspect. Again, where did this individual get these ideas for a vehicle ramming, then to open fire on responding officers, and then apparently to also have in the vehicle some kind of an improvised device that is, what was the intention there? Was it to detonate as officers were responding? Was it to cause even more carnage of individuals near the scene? The authorities will try to learn everything they can.
Yeah, and I want to go back to Pierre Thomas because Pierre, you laid out really well how this investigation will play out. One of the things that often happen in these investigations is that once police are able to identify the suspect, right, they're able to go back and look at their digital footprint. Do we estimate that that will be the case here? Obviously, once they figure out who he is, and then how does that also play into just the textbook mindset within these types of attacks?
Well, clearly, right now, there will be an effort to basically vacuum clean this person's life, find out everything possible they can find out about the person. And I should add that given the scale of the event, this is being treated as a matter of the highest national priority. We are just being told that the president has been briefed, President Biden has been briefed on this. That tells you the level of concern and the scale of the event. I'm also in contact with federal law enforcement sources. The FBI director will be briefed, as well as the Attorney General of the United States. This is now, again, all kinds of resources will be put on this from the FBI. ATF will be involved as needed. Everything needs to be put into this because you need to find out, is this contained? Is this over? Did this person have any kind of support? And again, we don't yet know, again, what the motivation is. Was this something specific to this individual in the person's own mind solely? Did this person draw inspiration from international or domestic terrorism groups? Hate is, on the rise in this country. So law enforcement just has a lot of priorities to get through in terms of narrowing down what the motive is, if they can determine it, to give the public a sense of what this is and what it is not.
Absolutely. There are a lot of layers to consider here, a lot of layers to go through, simultaneously in terms of the investigation here. You've got, the car plowing into the crowd there. You've got the motive. You've got digging into the suspect. There are so many things that police are considering at this hour. If you were just joining us, of course, we are on the air with a special report because we're learning at least 10 people are dead after a suspect drove his pickup truck into a crowd just hours after, celebrations for New Year's Eve. We also are learning about explosives being found and then also a shootout between officers and that particular suspect. Let's go back to Aaron to kind of lay out this timeline once again for the folks who are just now joining us.
This started just about 3:15 in the morning local time. There was still a big crowd of locals and tourists on Bourbon Street, still celebrating into the new year of 2025, when a white pickup truck somehow steered around barriers meant to keep vehicles out and keep Bourbon Street clear from pedestrians, and then started off very fast, plowing into a crowd. 10 people dead, 36 injured, now taken to area hospitals. As soon as the driver left the vehicle, that's when he began firing on responding New Orleans police officers, shooting 2 of them. They're now in stable condition at the hospital. The authorities shot and killed the suspect and then found what they described as an improvised device that's now being tested for viability. The authorities have not ascribed a motive, but they were able to learn enough to immediately call in the FBI, believing, Morgan, that this was an act of terrorism.
All right, and it appears we're just getting a statement in from President Joe Biden, who, of course, has been briefed on the horrific news, saying that he is in touch with the New Orleans mayor, Cantrell, to office report. We also know that the FBI, again, is on the ground supporting local law enforcement, and that the president will continue to be briefed on this. Aaron, we heard from the chief, the superintendent of police in New Orleans. She went as far as saying that this appeared to be an act of terrorism, but perhaps the FBI will take a little bit of time in terms of determining that, because that appears to be a federal designation. Explain the difference between the two.
It's a legal definition, and were the suspect to have lived and get charged with federal crimes, then it would have been a matter of prosecutors determining whether it was an act of terrorism legally. But to the police, there's no doubt. And look at the elements that leads police to that conclusion. A vehicle ramming, gunfire, an improvised device, a suspect that is now dead, but the authorities knew enough almost right away for the police to believe that this was an act of terrorism. And they'll try to figure out his motive, whether he was just angry internally and decided to act out, whether he took inspiration specifically from something he read online or from some kind of terror-type propaganda. But look, Morgan, you didn't have to read very much. We just had this, less than 2 weeks ago in Germany, a vehicle ramming attack. It's something that authorities had been on guard for, especially since then. But ever since the attack around Christmas in Nice in, 2016, when vehicle ramming became a thing for terrorists to employ. It's crude, but terribly effective at causing the kind of carnage that the police in New Orleans said this suspect was hell-bent on causing.
Yeah, it's sad that we've seen this time after time, and it's absolutely horrific that something like this plays out right around the holidays, a situation which should be so exuberant and celebratory for so many. I want to go back to ABC's Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas. We heard Aaron talk about just the heightened threat environment that our nation, our country had been under. You talked a little bit about what authorities are going to be looking for when it comes to combing through the suspect's background here, his past movements. Obviously, they still have yet to identify him, just the different designations when it comes to, local police categorizing this as an act of terrorism. But that escalation is something that the federal government corresponds to a particular charge. Just kind of take us once again through this investigation here and where things stand and where things go from here. Pierre.
Again, they have a lot of information to work with from the start. They have the vehicle. In theory, if the suspect is dead and then, and the body is there, they'll be looking for ID on this person, again, to do background, immediate, broad-scale investigation. It appears that they know a lot of information already. They're saying there will be another press briefing at 11 a.m. I'm assuming that's Central Time. But right now, the weapon, the vehicle, tracing the car, ownership of the car, all these things are critical. And if they have a name, one of the first things they do is look at the social media footprint, if one exists. Is there anything that has been posted online? Are there any writings? Are there any references or even Google accounts that the person has been looking at to see what the person has been interested in? You recall in the incident involving former President Trump over the summer, they were able to get a lot of information from the suspect's background from social media. That's standard operating procedure. But to be clear, since October of 2023, when we had that horrific attack in Israel, the FBI director, the attorney general, has said that we've been under perhaps the most intense threat environment in recent history, certainly since 9/11, that every aspect of the terror categories have been essentially on fire with so many different threats of political violence and so many other different things. And this was exactly the kind of event that they were concerned about happening. Again, 2 potential assassination attempts since the summer, and now this incident. And they've been making cases against suspects all throughout the year, individual lone wolves. And again, right now, the emphasis has to be on what exact kind of incident is this? And though, again, it's heavy pressure on them to report that out because that's going to inform local law enforcement around this country and indeed FBI field officers around this country as to what other security changes they need to take or put in place.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens when it comes to that. Joshua, you just pushed out a stat that for the 3rd year in a row, New Year's Eve events have been marred by violence. We heard Pierre kind of lay out where this investigation goes from here, what authorities are going to be looking into. And this may be speculation, but does it appear at this case, do authorities know whether this particular attack was thoroughly planned out or what else the suspect potentially, intended to carry out? We know he had the explosives authorities finding that explosive device as well. There was a shooting. We also heard the superintendent say that it appears that he wanted to hurt as many people as possible. What else do we know?
It would be hard to think that they actually know that whether it was planned out, although there's obviously some level of preparation associated with it. The driver, according to the witness accounts, the driver was trying to get around barriers and had seemed to have some sort of familiarity with the area. That's obviously going to be a key. But that's the problem with these types of things. As we were talking about, this is the third year in a row where there's a New Year's incident. And none of these incidents really require much in the way of preparation at all. You had the incident with the knife attack near Times Square. You had the incident in Rochester with an SUV full of gas cans running into another SUV in front of a theater. You know, in New York, the only thing they really could do after the knife attack 2 years ago, and then as Pierre was talking about with the heightened threat environment, is they've just made the frozen zone around Times Square bigger. At some point, you're still going to have the public there'll be a choke point. There'll be gatherings. At Times Square last night, we saw that people on 6th Avenue and on 8th Avenue outside the frozen zone, there was a choke point. Now, they were farther away from the center of the action, and that protects the event, but people are gathering. And New Year's is just such an iconic event, and it's not only iconic in America with all of the locations that we have, like San Francisco and Las Vegas and, of course, New York. New Year's is iconic around the world. So if you're putting your mind, if you're thinking like a would-be attacker, as terrible as it is, that's when they want to do this, because the attacker, whatever their angle or their anger or grievance is, the attacker wants people to see it. It's the act that interests them. It's the damage they cause, the people they kill. And so New Year's, there's just no bigger stage, so to speak.
Yeah, and Johnson, is it possible that this particular suspect wanted to carry out this attack to send a message? Perhaps if New Year's in the beginning of the year was of symbolism to them. I know all of that will be under investigation, but we also have seen that play out as well in recent attacks. Again, you talked about the heightened threat environment. All cards are on the table again at this point, but so many layers to this investigation. Authorities are going to be looking at several angles, possible motives here. The FBI, of course, is taking this over. So what other possibilities could they be considering?
Well, obviously, they would look to see if this is just somebody who's, as they call it, disaffected person who's angry and just wants to attack people. So it may not be political. It may not be somebody who is acting on behalf of a cause like that. It might just be somebody who's acting out. You know, the first thing they had to look at was this a drunk driver? Because we have seen terrible incidents of carnage on the roads where a drunk driver gets behind the wheel, and that it's not that. And obviously, the police superintendent was eager to point that out. First thing, this was not an accident; it was an intentional act. And then they want to see what the intent was. The other thing is the experts who analyze these types of things. They're finding that it's not really just one thing most times, because most people, even if they have a political view, they don't act out violently. That's just not what people do. What happens is it's people who might have, diagnosed or undiagnosed mental illness potentially, people who have other kinds of stress-related factors, problems in their lives. And then you have people who get online and they gravitate toward violent propaganda or messaging or imagery, and that all builds into this toxic mixture that can motivate somebody to an act of violence, even if they might not have been violent. All of that is going to be part of the investigation. We really actually have a lot of information for as early as it is. But there will be so much more information that law enforcement is going to gather over the next few minutes and the next few hours, everything from fingerprints to, as Pierre was saying, the online history, the searching history of whoever the driver was, and then whether this person had any type of criminal or violent or psychiatric background. And we have seen in some of these terrible cases that there is nothing like that, potentially.
Absolutely. And of course, the investigation does continue. We are expecting a briefing later on this morning. But for now, let's reset here. If you're just joining us, 10 people, at least 10 people are dead, more than 3 dozen injured after a driver, according to police in New Orleans, plowed through a crowd. It happened just after 3:15 this morning, just hours after the celebrations there on Bourbon Street. Heard from witnesses as well, talking about not being able to tell the difference between fireworks and gunshots. Also, gunshots reported there because police say that there was some sort of shootout. We do understand that the suspect is deceased at this hour. I want to bring back in ABC's Aaron Katersky joining me now in studio. Aaron, what is the latest on the investigation from here?
The authorities were quick to say that this was an act of terrorism. It's a legal definition. We'll wait for the FBI to get more information before they label it. But the authorities knew enough. They saw the vehicle ramming. They saw the carnage left behind with 10 people deceased, 3 dozen injured. They saw the shootout. Then they saw some kind of an improvised device, as the FBI called it, that's now being tested to determine whether it was viable. And maybe there were other clues at the scene. We've seen a vehicle ramming attack here in New York City carried out by someone in a pickup truck who was flying an ISIS flag. That person's long been convicted and sentenced, but was there any kind of a clue like that at the scene? Because as soon as the police superintendent in New Orleans, Ann Kirkpatrick, came out, she declared this to be an act of terrorism.
Yeah, we had already been on alert as a nation since those deadly October 7th attacks last year. We talked about this being a high threat environment. More than 300 officers were already there working to secure the scene to prevent something like this. What else are they going to be looking at when it comes to these sorts of celebrations? And were the barricades effective at this point? Because the superintendent talked about how this suspect drove at a high rate of speed, but Bourbon Street is only but so long and so wide. But then also you had barricades securing, the revelers.
And the police superintendent said the driver was able to get around those barricades. So whatever they were, they obviously were insufficient to stop the truck from getting around. Maybe up on the sidewalk, narrow as it is, but was able to gain enough speed to plow through that crowd, still partying on Bourbon Street after 3 o'clock in the morning Central Time. That's going to be a question for down the road. You did hear the authorities say to people who may be concerned about this, go on about your day. And there's a parade in New Orleans for New Year's Day, the Sugar Bowl this evening. Those events will have to be secure, and people will have to feel secure after what happened. They're asking people to avoid Bourbon Street, so they're sealing it off for an 8-block radius while they continue to investigate at the scene. And then they'll work to secure the other mass gathering events, a parade, a football game that are occurring later on in the city.
And sadly, this is a type of incident that we've seen not just, you talked about the situation here in New York, but then also around the world as well. What makes these gatherings where you have folks in a concentrated place, thousands, hundreds at one particular time, what makes that so attractive to a suspect?
It's quick and easy because the authorities have to plan all of this elaborate security, and we talk about it on the air all the time about what police agencies do to secure these mass gathering events, and there just has to be one small gap for a perpetrator to get through. Whether it was on the promenade in Nice in a vehicle ramming attack, or in Waukesha, the Christmas parade, Waukesha, Wisconsin, whether it was as simple as a suspect driving with a bunch of gas canisters as people were letting out of a New Year's Eve concert in Rochester, New York last year, an ISIS-inspired suspect trying to stab New York City police officers at a checkpoint. Police take all of these events into account and will adjust security accordingly. But as we've seen just several hours ago, nothing is foolproof.
Absolutely. And we know that, security cameras are valuable in terms of these investigations. But how critical are eyewitnesses? Because you had hundreds, if not thousands, on Bourbon Street at the time.
The eyewitness accounts are going to be interesting. And the one you spoke to, I thought, was clearly shocked by what he witnessed, bodies on the ground after the car had gone through, confusing fireworks for gunshots. The security cameras may be more important in this case because they could be able to trace the truck's movements backwards. They know where it stopped. then they would like to see if they can find it on security cameras at an earlier position, perhaps get some kind of an idea about how it was able to get through the security barriers, but even sooner, before that, where did it originate?
Absolutely. Aaron, hang tight with me because we have Robert Boyce, retired NYPD detective, on with us. Mr. Boyce, just give us your take on this whole situation. I mean, absolutely horrific. 10 people killed. From your law enforcement perspective, what are police considering here?
Sure. So it's one of the things we train for is these vehicle-borne attacks, and so we like to call it 3D type of security, elevated threat as well from a sniper or a drone, subterranean from a subway, and also the street, which is more and more common that we see. And it started in these, as from what we saw, what Aaron has talked about earlier, and now we put out trucks to cut off main highways. And in New York, it's schemed this way, and it has been going on for quite some time. It hasn't been a problem for us once we had something in Times Square. And it's one of those things now that it's expected, and you have to have that component when you train for these things. So it's just awful time, but it's one of those things you have to have. And those checkpoints where you can stop them before they get to the main crowd. All these things are in your dynamic when you put together something like to stop these things.
Chief Boyce, it's Aaron Katersky. You dealt with one of these vehicle ramming attacks on the West Side Highway by a suspect in a pickup truck. In that case, was flying an ISIS flag, so you knew right away what you were dealing with. What kind of clues might police in New Orleans be looking at the scene on Bourbon Street?
Sure. So, Aaron, he had Saifullah Pipe-Off. It was Halloween in 2017, I believe. It's one of those things that we didn't have any bollards out there to stop. He jumped onto a path, and he had secondary weapons as well. He jumped out of a car. He had knives, and there were ISIS flags within the car. So right away we knew what we were dealing with. And a patrol responded and actually ended the threat by shooting him, but he survived. And we saw where he was from almost immediately. I was just there, and we went to the car, killed 8 people, and it was something that we hadn't seen before prior to that in New York City. So it was a terrible time, and you learn, and you scheme, and you all of a sudden you do your security checks. This is part of it. Saipov was radicalized in New Jersey, came over at the time in New York on Halloween. It was not an event. It was just a regular everyday thing. So you changed dramatically from that. Everything you do, you see something happen like in Vegas, the elevated shooter. Now you train for that, and you stop that. So it's one of those things that go into your components, your training, your checkdowns when you put all these in these events in New York City or anywhere around the country for that matter. So it's doesn't take a lot too. He had a secondary weapon, this individual, so he was training this for a while.
And we talked, and Aaron touched on this, and also Pierre, about this heightened threat environment, and also it appears to be at this point, sadly, almost textbook for these types of events to happen. You have, a suspect, plowing through a crowd. You go through the social media, you dig up what you can find. There usually tends to be some level of tension, or some sort of mental concerns, or some sort of history, or something on the dark web. In your experience, Rob, do you think from your vantage point that this was carefully planned out, or was this some sort of sporadic incident? We heard from the police chief saying that this happened at a high rate of speed and it happened so fast. What appears to be most likely in this case?
Most likely it was planned. And we're in the preliminary stages right now, so information is coming out, so it's difficult to say. So, it's a good guess he planned this out. So this is what this you have to go for it. It comes out of nowhere, I will tell you. We had this on 42nd Street as well. It wasn't terrorists, but it was an individual who just drove into a crowd, hit several people, killing one in the middle of the day. So they come out of nowhere. So it's really hard to scheme for. But on a celebratory night like last night, it's you have all your defenses up. But nonetheless, it can still happen, and that's what you have to plan for next time you get stronger And you'll figure out exactly how, as you deep dive into this thing, how long this person planned this.
And so many people there at one particular time, absolutely horrific. We heard from witnesses talk about just the sheer carnage and the shock there. What are some of the challenges with responding to a mass casualty event like this in New Orleans, on Bourbon Street, this concentrated area? You have so many people, you already have barricades. What are the challenges with this investigation and particularly that mass casualty response?
Yeah, it's very difficult, and the challenge is to go out there, lock down the scene immediately, neutralize the threat, and then get people out of there and to moderate as fast as you can, and lock it down and understand exactly if there's any more threats, and that's the issue there. And then you have to once identified, go to this person's house where they live and see if there's anything there that's at risk. So these are some of the things you deal with.
Thank you so much, Rob. And I believe Aaron had another question for you.
No, Chief, if you look at some of the imagery that we've been able to see from the truck, it appears that there's a pole attached to the back of the truck flying what may be a black flag. If that is in fact the black flag of ISIS, that's a telltale sign, and perhaps why the police superintendent felt compelled almost immediately to call this an act of terrorism. Yeah.
Absolutely. That Sapop had black flags in his truck, with that rented truck. Immediately, that's the first thing you go to. I think this could be that, and so now you have a federal investigation. Once that goes that way, that's the protocols are that the FBI walks into the investigation at that point. But nonetheless, you're part of the, initially as a police chief, a police officer, you're out there, locking down the scene, trying to find out what happened. At some point, there's going to be a federal investigation, so you lock down your crime scene, and that's the first thing. That's the direction you move in, Aaron. And until something else comes up, that it's not. But that's the first thing I'm thinking of when I see a black flag.
And clearly, Morgan, the authorities almost right away labeled this an act of terrorism, called the FBI, and said that the FBI would take over, in all likelihood because of clues like the potential flag on the truck.
Absolutely. We know the FBI is taking the lead on this case. We're actually getting some new reporting in from LeBron Joseph. He's a WGN reporter from our affiliate on the ground there. LeBron, are you with us?
Yes, Morgan, I am with you, and the latest we've gotten is that the suspect was shot by the officers that returned fire when he was shooting at them. Of course, he was shot and killed then. Those two officers, I should say, are currently in the University Medical Center here. You guys have a pretty good grip of exactly what's going on. From the 10 people that were killed, the police chief, Ann Kirkpatrick, stating that up to 36 folks were hospitalized that they could account for, but there are people here from other hospitals as well. Still a very active crime scene. In fact, over my shoulder, you should be able to see a coroner's wagon down at the corner of Canal and Bourbon Street. I don't think I've ever seen as many Orleans Parish coroner's vehicles at any crime scene, this being what's being called a mass casualty event here in the city of New Orleans. And just about every law enforcement agency here in the region a part of this thing as well. Mayor Cantrell stating and Police Chief Kirkpatrick stating that this is being turned over to the FBI, the investigation of this as well, hoping to string together the pieces of this from the pickup truck driving down Bourbon Street to the finding of the IEDs. The other part of this, which is fairly new, is that a complete sweep of the French Quarter is happening right now, looking into storm drains, looking into buildings, garbage cans, and all that from just about every police officer on foot, happening to my left in the French Quarter. Also, we saw this happening to the Central Business District to my right as well. That is the latest that we have, Morgan, here in New Orleans.
All right, WGNO reporter LeBron Joseph reporting from the scene there in the French Quarter. LeBron, thank you. Right now, we want to turn over to ABC News contributor Brad Garrett. Brad, you're joining us there. Brad, what's your take on all of this, where things stand? What are authorities really going to be looking at here? We heard from LeBron Joseph talk about authorities doing a clean sweep on all things French Quarter, going into buildings, even checking, appears to be the storm drains. They're not leaving any stone unturned in this investigation.
Well, no doubt. You have to deal with the immediacy of the situation. Yes, it looks like it's one driver, one truck, etc. But what else did he do? You've mentioned explosives. That's clearly a possibility. It's interesting that the FBI now has jumped in as a lead almost at the front end of this case, which certainly tells me that they have some indicators that this may be driven by some extremist idea or philosophy. We'll have to figure out what that is. And are the IEDs apparently found in or near his truck or his person, how they relate to what has happened? Clearly IDing him and running backgrounds, which I guarantee you they're already doing, may give them some idea of his philosophy, who he's connected to, etc. But it's another sad example of, despite the fact apparently they had up barriers of some sort, according to local reporting, he drove around them. So, that's something else they're going to have to look at, as Aaron pointed out earlier, with everything else going on, the Sugar Bowl, etc., because, these guys can be inspired by each other. And so law enforcement's really going to have to double down today.
Absolutely, Brad. And quick question for you. Is it possible that authorities at this point in this investigation know who the suspect is? I mean, they have the truck. I mean, obviously, they're going to be running forensics on whatever evidence that they collect throughout the morning. But is it possible that they're particularly close to figuring out who this person is?
Well, maybe. Does he have ID on him? You run the truck. Who does the truck come back to? Does it match, at least physically, who you have? I mean, fingerprints and DNA take a while, so we'll see. But I would guess that they may be, at this point, you're talking now 5 hours into this act, that they obviously know a lot more than what we are talking about. And maybe have a direction. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, that may be the reason the FBI has jumped into this case so early.
Brad Garrett, thank you, our contributor. If you're just now joining us, we know that 10 people have died at least because of an incident, a horrific incident playing out on New Year's Day, just as thousands, hundreds of people were gathering in the French Quarter in New Orleans after New Year's Eve celebrations. At least 3 dozen people rushed to area hospitals after a driver plowed through the crowd. The FBI is running point on this investigation. They have taken this over. Authorities have labeled this an intentional act, saying that this driver plowed into the crowd at a high rate of speed. We know that there were barricades. Authorities had been, planning the response to, prepare for this type of gathering for months. And we know that we had been under, as a nation, a high threat environment for at least more than a year. Again, the federal authorities are taking over this investigation, looking into the suspect, his background. We also know that there was a shootout between the suspect and several officers on the scene. That suspect has been reported deceased. We are still gathering many more details at this hour, including some new video that we are just now getting in. This is coming to us from a live stream from an Earth Cam. We want to take you to that video, and it shows just the panic there. You can see people running, several people running. And it appears that it happened just after this whole incident took place. Perhaps even the response there, down there in New Orleans, that is Bourbon Street, it appears, or the French Quarter. But again, we're talking about a situation that put hundreds of people scattering, scrambling for their lives. We heard from witnesses who said they could not tell the difference between the fireworks, the celebratory fireworks, or gunshots. We know that there were gunshots because there was a shootout. I do have Aaron Katersky. You've been reporting on this as well, gathering information. What else are we learning at this point, either about the timeline, the suspect, or where things stand?
The most urgent priority right now is to determine the viability of what were described as improvised devices, either in or near or around the area of the vehicle. Right now, police in New Orleans are using drones and other technology to search for potential devices all around the French Quarter. Not to say that there are necessarily any more than were found in the immediate vicinity, but they, of course, want to be sure. It's part of the reason why you heard the police superintendent say that there would be an 8-block radius sealed off around the scene of the crime. And so that's the most urgent priority now, in addition, of course, to treating the wounded at area hospitals, some 36 of them at various hospitals.
Yeah, certainly the possibility of explosives just heightening the potential danger there. We heard the police superintendent talk about staying away from that area. We know that the Sugar Bowl, other events taking place later today. Is it possible that we could see an escalation in terms of the police response there and any particular protective measures? If we've got a parade later, then perhaps, the barricades that were in place here may have to be expanded or perhaps tweaked a bit to accommodate or to address the ongoing threat.
I think it's almost certain there will be enhanced security for the different events on New Year's Day in New Orleans. You already heard the police superintendent say they've called officers in from neighboring agencies to try and support the New Orleans Police Department, which had already been at 100% staffing for New Year's Eve. So that's part of the reason there was such a quick police response. The officers encountered gunfire as soon as they responded to where the truck came to rest after plowing into all those people. We were told the suspect fired on officers. 2 of them were struck by gunfire. They're now in stable condition.
Absolutely. And Aaron, we were just watching some of that video from a live camera of the French Quarter, people scrambling. We know that there are cameras all over the French Quarter, as you would find in major municipalities. Those are going to be a big part in this investigation because you'll be able to pinpoint and see the exact movements. Where do you see this investigation going? How useful are those cameras going to be? We've also seen cell phone video come out as well. I mean, all of these accounts are critical.
They are, and they will undoubtedly start asking the public to send in images and accounts, eyewitness accounts to the FBI tip line as the investigation progresses. They want to, of course, see the incident, what happened, so they fully understand how fast the truck may have been going, where the people were positioned. Was it at random? Was there a specific group that may have been targeted? We just don't know any of that. But then they can work backwards with those cameras and try and determine where the truck started from and, crucially, how it was able to get around the barriers that police said were in place to prevent just this kind of thing.
Yeah, that is a big question this morning. I want to go back to Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas, if we still have him on the line, because, authorities were talking about, local authorities in New Orleans mentioned that this was an act of terrorism, but the federal government has not gone as far as classifying that as a designation just yet. Pierre, can you just briefly break down why and where things stand with federal authorities taking over this investigation, the things that they're going to be looking at, and when and if do they get to that point of designating this as an act of terrorism, and what are some of the factors that they're going to consider in this case?
Well, to be clear, the FBI has taken over the investigation. It is their case now to follow to its end, and basically the evidence will determine what they categorize this. Simple and period. And they're being overly careful here because, once the prosecution starts, they want the proper designation, the proper statutes to apply. And here, the motivation is the key. What was this person motivated by? What is the evidence that suggests that they were, again, deranged, or following some kind of ideology, be it ISIS, domestic terror, what have you. There are various hate groups that hate, various different groups in this country. All the above would be considered at this point. But we do know from my sources that they have some leads that they're following. The suspect is dead. Whether they can find ID on this person will be key. And again, we have information that they can glean from the truck, the vehicle, many other different things. But the key will be the evidence. The evidence will dictate what this is categorized. We may learn more when they have this press conference in a couple hours.
Yeah, expecting a press conference shortly in a couple of hours. We are learning from a DOJ, the Department of Justice spokesperson, that the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, has been briefed on this morning's incident in New Orleans. This comes just shortly after the White House announced that President Biden has also been briefed on this, again reiterating that the FBI is investigating. I want to go back to Brad Garrett here. Brad, we were just seeing some video of the feed of that particular area. Obviously, you've got dozens, if not hundreds, of police officers, as the police chief or the police superintendent has pointed out. What things are they going to be looking at from here? We also heard LeBron Joseph, the WGNO reporter from our affiliate, our ABC affiliate, they're talking about how they're even going as far as checking manholes, still running into buildings, doing sweeps there. I mean, this is a really thorough investigation, it appears.
Right, and one of the keys is going to be the camera system in New Orleans, because if they can track his vehicle, if this occurred roughly 3:15 this morning, where was that vehicle 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes before this event occurred? Because that may give them some guidance. But yes, if you find IEDs, which they're saying they have found, is it more than one? Where were they found? And that does lead you to your point of checking any place you could secrete an IED, like down a manhole or in a trash can. Anything that the public could potentially walk by and an explosion would occur. Now here's the problem. As they move to the Sugar Bowl and everything else in a parade, it'll be interesting to see if they still have the parade, for starters. But if they do, the amount of coverage they're going to have to pull that off. And it's almost guaranteed that everything is going to be put on hold till they clear the French Quarter to make sure that there is no other devices that could harm somebody. But as I mentioned earlier, the key is tracking him prior to this event, because it could give them some clues if in fact there was any other explosive devices around New Orleans.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Do you foresee, the parade and the other events happening later today if they are still working to clear the French Quarter? I mean, we're talking about the potential for explosive devices that, authorities are checking for those. They're using drones, again, going into buildings, checking manholes. How long does this type of sweep continue to take place? I mean, how long can they go, and what other resources have to be called in? Because you're talking about a high skill set, for this type of search, whether it be, bomb dogs or bomb sniffing dogs, folks who can easily disable any sort of devices, other specialty units that have to be called in here. We're talking about really meticulous work.
There is no doubt. So every city of size has emergency contingencies. New Orleans clearly will have one, which will translate into pulling resources from other jurisdictions. Now, because the FBI jumped into this, you're basically going to have the field office in New Orleans, which is going to be a lot of agents and support employees, to include bomb techs, etc., are already pulled into this investigation. So the number of people probably is adequate based on what they have at this point. As I mentioned earlier, my concern is as this day expands, you're not going to be able to move the intensity of your manpower quickly. So they could be in the French Quarter or around this area of New Orleans for a lot of hours to make sure that it is clear. That's the unfortunate thing when you find an IED. They're so easy to plant and actually build. What happened here? Is there other ones out there? So it's going to be a while. It's going to be several hours, I think, before they declare this part of New Orleans safe.
Absolutely, Brad Garrett, thank you for weighing in there. If you're just joining us, it's 9:01 here on the East Coast, and we are on the air with a special report because a horrific incident occurred down in New Orleans, Louisiana. At least 10 people killed, dozens at least 3 dozen others injured after police say a suspect rammed through barricades and plowed into a crowd of revelers on Bourbon Street. Right now, authorities are still on the scene there. They are investigating. We've heard from witnesses. The FBI is taking over this investigation. President Biden has been briefed along with the Department of Justice, Attorney General Merrick Garland. But of course, this investigation does continue. Authorities are now sweeping the French Quarter, checking for additional potential for explosive devices after they say one was discovered on that suspect in his pickup truck. A shootout, we're also learning, occurred between the suspect and 2 police officers who this morning are in stable condition. Right now, I want to go over to Richard Frankel, retired FBI. Thank you so much for joining us. We know the FBI is taking over this investigation. From your vantage point, what are some of the things that they're going to be considering? What is your take on this, and where do things go from here?
So, this just happened a few hours ago. Everyone's still just trying to figure out what happened, how this person got to where they are, how they got through, the barricades. They're going to start pulling everything apart on this guy's life. They're going to be looking at everything they can, where he's from, where he is on social media, who his friends are, what, if any, political, social, economic views he has that might bring him to the side of extremists, terrorists. They're going to be basically doing everything they can to know who the guy is and why he did what he did.
Rich, it's Aaron Katersky. The urgent priority seems to be on the explosive devices that the FBI says were found. They have to test those for viability and do a scan to see if there are any other in the area. Is that why the French Quarter, at least a significant chunk of the French Quarter, shut down right now?
Yeah, so what you'll do on this type of investigation is you're going to kind of bifurcate the investigation. The first thing that has to be done is make sure that everything is safe and secure. So you're going to be having the bond text from the FBI, ATF, local law enforcement. They're going to be going through that entire area, through the entire French Quarter. They're really going to have to go into every crevice that they can that can hold an IED and see if there is anything there. This is going to take a long time. And what's going to be taking even longer is if they find stuff left behind. Again, this was, New Year's Eve, a lot of revelers out there. Then you have this traumatic incident. People left bags behind, left items behind. They're going to have to go through each one of those and make sure none of them are IEDs. So this is going to take a long time to get through. It's not that they haven't done this type of thing before. They have. So there is a plan to go. I'm sure you've got resources out of Quantico, the FBI lab, coming down to assist. I'm sure you have CERG from FBI, which is the Critical Incident Response Group. They're sending people down, as well, in addition to other agencies from the entire federal government that are going to come down and assist in clearing that location, clearing the French Quarter to make sure everything's safe and secure.
Yeah, and certainly the environment heightened right now because we know that there, again, are other events taking place today, the parade, the Sugar Bowl as well. Again, if you are just now joining us, we are on the air because of a horrific act on the first day of the year. At least 10 people killed, dozens more wounded in the hospital after police say a driver plowed into a crowd of people on Bourbon Street. The busy Bourbon Street happened this morning just after 3:15. Just as many people were celebrating and bringing in the new year. Also, a shootout between officers and this particular suspect. We understand that the suspect has died. Again, authorities are now still investigating this and will be continuing to investigate throughout the day here. We are expecting another update again at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And of course, we're going to continue to bring you that both on air and online. You can also find us on ABC News Live with the very latest. For this special report, Morgan Norwood. Happy New Year.
This has been a special report from ABC News.